Okay, everybody, so the next topic that we're going to be covering has to do with molecular compounds. Up to this point, all we've talked about are ionic compounds. These are compounds that are made of ions. Molecular compounds are not made of ions. So before we go on, let's really be clear about what ionic compounds are. They are compounds that are made of ions. Here's an example. Sodium chloride is an ionic compound. It is made of ions. It's made of sodium ions and chloride ions. I've just drawn two ions. They are attracted to each other because they have opposite charges. Sodium ion has a positive charge. Chloride ion has a negative charge. In order for the sodium ion to become positive, it must have lost one electron. So what I'm showing here is this sodium atom, which is neutral, loses one electron to become the sodium ion, which has a positive charge, and it throws out this electron. The chlorine atom, on the other hand, gains one electron. So this atom gains one electron to become this negative ion. Where did that electron come from? It came from the sodium, in fact. All right, so this is really how an ionic compound is formed. An electron is lost completely, let's say by a metal atom, and then that electron is gained completely by this other non-metal atom to become an anion, a negative ion. You might remember that metal atoms give up electrons really easily, and nonmetals hold on to electrons very well. Metals give up electrons very easily, so they lose electrons very easily. Nonmetals hold on to electrons very well. They gain electrons very easily. So, in fact, this is why we get these positive charges and negative charges. An electron is lost completely, an electron is taken on completely. Now, this is going to be different for molecular compounds. Okay, for molecular compounds, we're going to have a different situation. All right, let's say one more thing about ionic compounds, and this is something that you really need to keep in mind. All right, this is a really important point. Ionic compounds always contain a metal cation and a non-metal anion. In other words, if you're looking at a compound and you see that there's a metal and a non-metal in that compound, you have an ionic compound, an ionic bond. Molecular compounds, on the other hand, always contain non-metals. Here are some examples of molecular compounds. Here's one that you know for sure. Water, H2O. There is no metal there. Those are two nonmetals, hydrogen and oxygen. How about carbon dioxide? No metal there, just two nonmetals, carbon and oxygen. Here's methane. All right, methane, carbon and hydrogen, two nonmetals. These are examples of molecular compounds. There are no ions in these compounds. All right. Ionic compounds are held together by opposite electric charges. In other words, if you got a positive ion and a negative ion, they are stuck together really strongly because opposites attract. Opposites attract each other, and that is called, in fact, an ionic bond is literally just a positive attracted to a negative, and they're stuck together because opposite charges attract each other. So what is it about molecular compounds that keep those atoms together? So the question is, what is it that keeps atoms together in a molecular compound? If there are no ions to hold those atoms together, if there are no opposite charges to hold those atoms together, then what is it that's keeping atoms together in a molecular compound if there are no ions present? So what is it that keeps atoms bound to each other if the atoms do not have opposite charges? Well, let's consider two non-metal atoms, and let's talk about that. Okay, so here's an atom of hydrogen, it's a non-metal, and here's an atom of fluorine, also a non-metal. What we found out in the lab is that non-metal atoms like to hold on to electrons really well. We actually observed this in the lab. All right, so these atoms come together, and when these atoms contact each other, they are also attracted to each other's electrons. Neither atom will give up its electrons completely. Remember, nonmetals don't give up electrons very easily. So they're not giving up their electrons to each other. They are going to, in fact, share electrons. And this sharing of electrons is, in fact, called a covalent bond. Okay? In ionic compounds, we have an ionic bond. In molecular compounds, we have a covalent bond. A covalent bond is where electrons are shared between atoms. I'm going to draw a couple pictures of some molecules and show the covalent bonds that those molecules have. Here are some molecules, and I'm also drawing the diagram of those molecules. Here's hydrogen fluoride, HF. Okay, it has a structure like this, and this line represents the covalent bond. In fact, all of the lines in these molecules represent covalent bonds. There's water, H2O, and it has two covalent bonds, a covalent bond between the oxygen and hydrogen and a covalent bond between oxygen and hydrogen. Here is a diatomic molecule called chlorine, and there is a single bond between the two chlorine atoms. That is a covalent bond.